welcome back to our podcast. I'm the Disturbed Southern Belle.
And I'm the gentleman.
On this episode, we're going to be talking about some, disturbing and interesting facts about the Aztecs.
So, quick disclaimer. This episode is not for the faint of heart.
No, definitely not, because there is going to be some gruesome depictions, because as we know, they were well known for sacrificing, and they were kind of hard on their children and things like that. So, now, it's not terrible, don't worry, but if you don't like that kind of thing, you may want to bypass this one. So we're going to start out with something that's actually kind of interesting, is that their soldiers and warriors or whatever, they preferred to capture enemies instead of killing them. Now, there was a very good reason for this, and we'll discuss it later, but they believed that killing an enemy was clumsy and that it took much more skill to capture their enemies instead, which, of course,
that's
would.
True.
It would.
I do not disagree with that.
Exactly. Now, so since this was a task, of course, that took a lot of skill, it was used as a way to measure a man's ability as a warrior, basically.
Again, that's fair.
The more people he could capture, the stronger, better warrior he was, more or less. And he'd move up in the ranks. So there were different ranks, of course, and we'll discuss those in a bit. But so, for example, there were two of the higher ranks were considered Jaguar and Eagle Knights, so to speak, warriors. And they would have to get to this rank, they would have to capture approximately 5 to 6 enemies. Mm-hmm. So that's a fair amount,
Yeah.
And the ranks of these two knights were essentially the same. They were basically on the same level. They just picked which side they wanted to go to. They wanted to be a Jaguar and Eagle. Pretty much the difference was that they wore different clothes. One dressed as an eagle, one dressed as a jaguar, and they worshiped different gods. The Eagle Knights worship, now I'm going to do my very best on these pronunciations, Huitzilopochtli, who was an Aztec sun and war god, and he's usually represented by a hummingbird or eagle. So, of course, they would dress as eagles. And the Jaguars worship the god Tezcatlipoca, and they, of course, dress as jaguars, and whatever. But they were essentially the same. So it's kind of weird, though, to think that they were out capturing people, that would have battles. That was like the prime thing they wanted to capture. And as we said, we will discuss why. Sacrifice was performed on these captives. So they did a lot of sacrificing. So they needed a lot of people. And they didn't want to keep killing their own people, of course. So that's one of the reasons.
Next best thing.
There you go.
The people who want to harm our people.
There you go. Or the people they just ran up on. Who knows? So the Aztecs believed in hundreds, if not thousands of gods. I mean, they believed that gods were responsible for literally everything. For the reason the sun rose, the rain fell from the sky, and literally everything else in the world, there was some god that was over it, basically. And they also believed that these gods had to be nourished with blood. Because, of course, they would.
Of course.
What else would they eat? So one way they would do this was bloodletting, which was simply they would just cut themselves, just little pricks on their skin, allowing the blood to flow. And the higher you were in society, the more blood you were expected to give. So if you were a noble born or whatever, you were expected to cut yourself more and give more blood. So, of course, another way they fed their gods was sacrificing enemy warriors, which is why, of course, capturing the enemies was very important, as they needed them for the sacrifices.
Yep.
So the ritual for sacrifices was pretty similar. So the only thing that changed was the amount of sacrifices they would do at one time. And this could literally range from one single sacrifice to thousands at one time.
Which is insane to think about.
I read that it was said that they would sometimes sacrifice, it was believed, up to like 20,000 people a year. And that's quite a few people.
That's a lot of people.
So this ceremony normally took place at the top of this big pyramid thing. It has like a flat top, whatever. So this priest would make an incision under the ribs, then he would stick his hand into the wound and reach up into the chest cavity, grab their heart, pull it out, and throw it in a fire. And then they would just take the body and just kind of toss it down the stairs, leading up to the pyramid.
Well,
unless they were noble or considered somewhat important, then they would carry their body down, make it nice, of course. They would just kick them down the steps. But Jesus. Now, this was just normal. I mean, could you imagine seeing something like this? Somebody's heart getting ripped out and then just
No.
body just kicked down the steps like, whatever. Oh, well, it's just a Tuesday. I mean, it's kind of funny when you think about it. But I guess it sort of, in some ways, I guess it makes sense that they were so tough because you got to think about the time they were living.
Oh, yeah. You were either tough or you were going to die.
They were living in a very primitive time. They never got the ability to forge metal. So they never had any metal weapons. So they were somewhat primitive compared to like the Spaniards and things like that. So yeah, and they're living out in this wilderness, jaguars running around, so I mean it was a dangerous place to be. So another thing that they're known for was the dreaded Maquahuitl, which this is like this.
Oh, it's that club weapon.
Yes. And it's considered to be the most devastating weapon used by the Aztec warriors. And this Maquahuitl, which means hungry wood. So they were advanced, like I said before, in a lot of different ways, but they never developed the ability to forge weapons. So they had no metal weapons. So they had this weapon, which was basically this flat wooden paddle, which is kind of like a club. And in it, they had these razor-sharp stones known as obsidian, which was embedded on the side. Now, for those who don't know, obsidian is this naturally occurring black volcanic glass, and it's very hard, and it's also brittle if it's not handled correctly, but it's razor sharp. I mean, it was just ridiculous. So they have this club, these basic black hard glass hammered into it or whatever.
Which is actually why obsidian knives are like so well sought after.
Right. So this weapon was said to be powerful enough to remove someone's head. And according to a report by invading Spaniards, they stated that they saw an Aztec warrior decapitate a horse with a single blow with one.
Now, I've seen images of these weapons. I've seen how people had thought they were made. That does not surprise me.
So,
because from what I've seen, these things they had some very good heft to them.
Right. Now, these warriors were trained from a very young age, as you can imagine. And these were not wimpy men. They were raised to be tough. I mean, kids are like 4 years old. They were made to get up, do chores. I mean, they were tough.
Another thing about those specific weapons I've seen or I've noticed is that they, like the way they place the obsidian, it makes it, and some of them look like teeth.
Right, it does.
Which may actually be why it was called hungry wood.
Might be.
But that would also attribute to how they were able to decapitate so easily.
Right.
Because if they swung it just right, they could actually get a sawing motion going.
Exactly.
Which would make it easier to cut through.
Yeah, exactly. Now, they tested this, if anyone's ever watched, and I've watched this show, and I don't remember if I saw the specific episode, but the Deadliest Warrior, they would take the different weapons from those times, and they would try to replicate them and test it. So they used this horse's neck that was made out of ballistic gel. Now, while the person who was wielding this weapon wasn't able to do it in one blow, it didn't take but a few whacks, and it was doing some pretty good damage, let's put it that way. So somebody who really knew what they were doing and was really tough, who knows?
And really used to using this kind of weapon.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's not funny, but Jesus, that would definitely be
it would be a very devastating tool.
Oh, absolutely. So the next thing we're going to talk about is some of their afterlife beliefs. So in most religions, people are rewarded in the afterlife depending on how they live. So if you live a good life, you go to heaven, yada, yada, just depending on, what you believe. But the Aztecs, they were a bit different. Now, they believed that the way someone died would determine the afterlife where they were to spend their time.
Which is similar to a lot of other well-known religions and mythologies and stuff.
Exactly. Now, they had 4 different afterlives that you could go to. So, the warrior's afterlife showed exactly how much the Aztecs loved to fight. So, if someone died in battle, or if they died because they were sacrificed, their souls would go to an afterlife where they would fight with the god Huitzilopochtli, and they would have to spend 4 years fighting against the darkness to ensure the sun rises each day. They would then be able to return to the earth as either a hummingbird or some other exotic bird. Which, wow, right? I mean, I don't know why that would be a reward, but whatever. I guess you wouldn't have any cares, so to speak.
Just slowly watch the world
I
burn.
guess so.
Watch your people just dominate the others.
I guess. I guess that's what it was. So the next afterlife was for women who died during childbirth. Now, this afterlife is kind of similar to the previous one. However, their job was to prepare the sun for its journey into the underworld every day. So the warriors, they fought the darkness, and they would prepare the sun for its journey through the underworld to come back and rise up every day. The next afterlife was for those who died that were either be struck by lightning, those who drowned, or those who died from sickness. And the only thing that's really said about this afterlife is that there was plenty of food. So
struck by lightning seems very specific.
It does. But yeah, struck by lightning is very specific. I thought that when I was reading, I was like, okay, was that something that happened a lot? I mean, what?
I mean, you'd have to imagine so, or you'd have to imagine it was connected to one of their deities.
Maybe. Maybe that's what it was. I don't know.
It's really interesting to me just how specific that one part is.
Yeah, struck by lightning, drowned, or died from a sickness.
Drowning and dying from a sickness seems that's fairly common.
Right.
Struck by lightning.
It doesn't seem like it would be that common. No, it doesn't. But anyway, they had their own afterlife, and there was plenty of food anyway. So lastly, those that died from natural causes like old age. So in this afterlife, the souls had 4 years to pass through these 8 levels of challenges, which included things like climbing a mountain made of obsidian, which, wow, that, would be fun. And passing through an area that was filled with beasts that ate human hearts.
Even more fun.
Oh, yeah. Now, if they made it to the 9th level, their soul would finally be able to rest.
I'm genuinely not sure which one I would prefer.
Really?
The beast or the glass mountain?
Yeah. Could you imagine trying to climb that thing with those jagged edges and stuff? Jesus.
I don't want to.
And plus, it get wet, like you're sweating or blood. Yeah. You just be, oh God,
you'd be slipping and cutting yourself more, causing more blood, and more slipping.
Oh yeah, of course it would. How would
Imagine
it not?
You get almost all the way to the top. One miscalculated move, you just slide all the way back down.
That would be my luck. Yes, that sounds like something that would happen to me. But anyway. They only had to do 8 challenges. I mean, and they sound...
At least it's only 8.
Yeah, and it sounds like they were pretty easy. So, I mean, it shouldn't have been a big deal. But, and they had 4 years to do them. I mean, come on. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it sounds horrible. But anyway. So, of course, all males were trained for battle. So, the Aztecs, they didn't have, like, an actual army. Like we would consider an army. However, they did have what they did have was a culture in which every male was trained for battle. So noble-born male children were sometimes thought to start their training, sometimes even as early as 6 years old. So, while other male children, they were normally allowed to stay at home until they're around 13-ish, 13 to 15, somewhere around in there.
It's always weird to me hearing about cultures where nobility has more responsibilities.
Yeah. And this, they did. I mean, they really did. They were not treated well. And we'll get into that more in a little bit. Some of the things a lot of the noble-born children had to do. And it wasn't what you think it would be. Let's just put it that way. So the boys that were allowed to stay home were done so they thought they would kind of gain some skills that would help them to be a good soldier, like the ability to hunt, different things like that. Plus, just different skills in general, like life skills. And then they were sent to the capital for training. And while they were there, they were also taught to read and write, which is pretty cool. Okay. They were also taught the calendar. They studied astronomy and other academic topics. And then when they reached the age of 15, they were moved to the warrior training. And the veteran warriors would then start to teach the boys how to fight and help instill courage in them.
Which I assume just means beating them to a
Probably. I'm sure, yeah, different methods that were pretty brutal that, we don't want to get into too much.
I imagine they were a lot worse than the Spartans. And when it comes to training their young.
They were pretty bad. Just how they treated their children, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Some of the punishments that they had was bad. So, as we said before, there's different levels of warriors. So, there was the Jaguar and Eagle warriors, and they were essentially, the same rank. They wore different outfits and worshiped different gods, basically. Other than that, they were pretty much just the same in society. And the rank wasn't always a separate title. There were even some records reporting Eagle Jaguar warriors. So some were even combined. I guess some went, went all the way or whatever. So, like we said before, they had to capture around 5 to 6 enemies. And then they were given their own shield and Mockwittle, which is that club we talked about. They were finally given so now that's kind of screwed up if you think about it. They had to go out and fight and capture these 5 or 6 people with really no real weapons.
I assume there was no restriction on them making their own weapons.
Right. I mean, they might have some that they wouldn't
not have proper weaponry.
Exactly. They had to prove themselves first before they would get like their own shields and stuff. So yeah, it was not, it was not a fun time. Now, above them was the most elite fighting force for the Aztecs, and they're called the Shorn Ones. And they gained this name because they shaved their head, leaving only a long braid of hair on the left side of their head. And to get this rank, they would have to capture at least 20 men. And they were also made to take a vow that said that they would never take a step backwards during a battle. So they were like the best of the best. You did not want to mess with these men.
Actually, this reminds me of something. Like, these people were very strict on, like, cowardice and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Which makes me think that, or reminds me, rather, of something I read where there was this, I think it was a philosopher who said that the more we advance in weaponry, the more we find out about ways to kill each other from further away.
Oh, yeah.
The more cowardly we are.
Right. And in some ways, I guess it is sort of true because
we're not right there. We're not in as much danger.
We're not really in any danger. I mean, you think about a sniper from a mile away shooting someone and no one knows where they are. Are they in any danger? Not really. I mean, if no one knows their position, you know what I'm saying? Now, granted, they are in danger because they're in a dangerous area, but you get what I'm saying. It's not the same as if I walked up to you and was going to fight you face to face because you could hit me back or stab,
It's not as much of a fair fight.
Exactly.
It's considered cowardly to take too much of an advantage.
Right. And I mean, even the Spartans, come back with your shield or on it, where they bring the dead bodies back on the shield, that cowardice, no. In other words, you didn't run away from the battle. You stayed. You either died or you come back alive.
And probably died.
There you go. I mean, one or the other. So the Shorn Ones, they would also wear like this yellow uniform. And the Jaguar and the Eagle Warriors, they would, of course, dress similar to their namesakes. So the Eagle Warriors, they were adorned with feathers, and they would wear these wooden helmets that made it look like the warrior's face was coming out of the eagle's mouth. So like the mouth would be open and their face would be, there.
Right. That's pretty common for tribes. But also, just imagining it, it seems pretty cool.
It does. I mean, it does. So the Jaguars, now they would wear the skin of a jaguar and they would carve their helmet to look like a jaguar, their head, coming out of the mouth. Or whatever.
Now, that's honestly even more cool to me. The fact that they used jaguars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they would get them and they would skin them and then they would use that skin, So it was also thought that this was done as sort of a psychological warfare because they would perform these surprise attacks, jumping out dressed as these animals and stuff, and it would be like freaky, Then they would also add to this chaos by banging drums and making noise and hoping it'd make them scatter so they could get them separated and then, of course, start capturing them, picking them off, basically, make them easier to capture. So, yeah. It's kind of comical in some ways when you think about it.
Imagining it.
These people are coming out and running out banging these drums and stuff.
Like, imagining it nowadays with the media that we have seen, that we have consumed, imagining this makes it seem almost cartoony in a way.
It does. It does a little bit when you think about it in certain ways. So they also made sacrifices to Wewatel'otl. And there were variations of these. And this god was known as the god of fire and wisdom. So these sacrifices, as you can imagine, were, very easily done on the victim. There wasn't any pain. They always made sure to take very good care of their victims.
Well, of course, I imagine they injected them with morphine,
too. Yes, of course. So this one's, it's not the worst one that I read, but it's pretty bad. So one sacrifice would be where the victim would be basically thrown into this hot pit of coals.
And yes, that doesn't seem so bad.
No, make it even. It's not comical, but it is when you think about it.
It's funny how brutal that some of these are.
because while they were laying there on these coals burning up or whatever, these priests would be dressed in black and they would dance around them.
Yeah.
So, like, whatever.
Also, I realized that what I just said sounds really awful out of context.
Yeah, but anyway. So before they perish, they were then pulled from the fire using hooks. Then they were placed on an altar where their chest was cut open and their heart was removed.
Yeah.
Because,
as you do.
Yeah, exactly. However, there is a variation of this ritual that happened every 52 years. Now, in this ritual, there were extra steps were added after the heart was removed, basically. So they were thrown in the fire, they're took off, the chest is open, the heart. So they're laying there with their chest open. So then the priest at this 52-year mark would then try to start a fire inside the victim's chest. Now, exactly. Now, if they were successful and were able to start the fire, this was seen as a very good omen because it would mean that the empire would remain alight for the next 52 years. However, if the fire didn't start, this was seen as a sign that a monster was coming, and this monster would use the darkness to hunt and eat all of mankind.
Well, all right.
Exactly. I mean,
that's something.
Now, we are talking about the Aztecs, so, they had a lot of stuff where they thought everything was, the end of the world. All the time, mankind was, so, it's not unusual for that, but good grief. Now, this next one this one's pretty rough. And this is Shipatotec, and he's also known as our Lord the Flayed One.
So, again, all right then.
So, good name, right? Now, ironically enough, this was the god of spring and agriculture, and he was also the god who helped the transition of boys into men. It was some other things like disease, different things, but that was the main things, that he was known for. So, he was celebrated every spring in March, and in this celebration, I use that term very loosely, there were 3 gruesome rituals that were performed in his honor. Okay, so first, the victim was sacrificed and their heart would be removed. Then they would remove the skin, flay the skin. Now, here's where it gets interesting, we'll say.
As if it wasn't already.
Yeah. So the skin that they cut off the victim, these priests would then dye it yellow, and then they would wear it for 20 days. And they called this golden clothes. They wear this dead person's skin for 20 days. Then they would bury that rotten skin at the foot of the temple or the stairs of the pyramid, whatever.
This keeps getting progressively worse and worse.
It does.
And it keeps surprising me that it keeps getting worse.
It does. When they would finally get to take off this skin, they, shed this skin, so to speak, it was considered to be the symbolic, the earth changing from winter to spring. Now, it seems like, whatever, who cares, but, okay. Jesus Christ. Could you imagine the stench coming off these people?
I don't want to.
God. But anyway. So the second way a victim would be sacrificed is they would be tied to like this wooden frame, and then they'd be shot with arrows and left to slowly bleed out while those in attendance would sing hymns, to make them feel better, of course. Actually, that doesn't sound like it would be the worst.
No. Honestly, it sounds like one of the best that we've covered so far.
Right.
This kind of just seems like an advanced form of crucifixion, if I'm being honest.
Kind of is a little bit, I guess. So lastly is the gladiatorial sacrifice. Now, this one is super interesting. Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into it. I'm not going to go over every single thing because it does get pretty brutal, but I'm going to give you the highlights. So basically, this ritual would take place outside of this temple that was dedicated to the god. Okay? So this ritual consisted of taking one of the captured warriors, and they would tie them to this big stone. Then they'd be forced to drink tlili, which was an alcoholic drink. So they're drunk. They'd be forced to get drunk. And then they would be given these very primitive weapons, basically no armor, nothing to defend themselves, pretty much. And, of course, that's the end of it, right? I mean, what else could possibly go wrong at this point? No. This warrior then was made to fend off 4 fully dressed and heavily armed Aztec warriors, 2 jaguars and 2 eagles.
Why not?
and would pretty much nothing. Now, they had all their weapons. They were armored up. They were ready to roll. So, yeah, as you can imagine, I'm sure he stood
A
a really
drunk, unarmored, barely armed man
right against
fighting
four.
4 fully armored warriors.
Right.
And they're all completely sober, I presume.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not
I see
inebriated.
nothing unfair about this at all.
No, of course not. Now, if the Aztec warriors were able to wound him, like, wound him, they were then taken to altar to have their heart removed, and then sometimes they were also flayed. Although, if the victim was able to fend off the warriors, they would then add a left-handed warrior to the mix, and then he was made to continue to fight, and they wouldn't stop until somebody wounded him. Then, of course, he was sacrificed. So pretty much he was going to be
sacrificed. What's the point?
I don't know. I mean, entertainment? I don't know. Exactly. It's not funny, but Jesus, right. What is the point? Because they're going to kill him anyway. Why not just go ahead and do it? I guess, is some entertainment.
Beyond that, imagine that one guy is able to kill.
Fend them off.
Fend them off.
Just keep them from wounding you, basically, for so long.
He is injuring your warriors.
Mm-hmm. Possibly killing them. Who knows?
You're losing people
Possibly.
for something that, to my understanding, just seems like a sport.
Well,
just entertainment.
But obviously they didn't have a big thing about. They didn't care. The sacrifice was nothing to them. So, another belief they have is life is all affliction. So the Aztecs didn't believe in lying to children. So now this is not comical, but it is if you think about doing this to a newborn child. It's just something they say, but it's kind of funny just imagining somebody doing this. So basically what happens, as soon as the child is born, a midwife would take the baby in their arms, cut the umbilical cord, give prayer, thanks, whatever. Then she would look the newborn baby right in the face and say, life is all affliction. And then, to make sure she really drove this home, they would go on to tell the baby that it would die a horrible and violent death, either in a war or as a human sacrifice.
I mean,
it's true.
Yeah.
But, could you imagine holding a little baby saying that? They don't know what you're saying anyway, but seriously. But it's not, it's just comical to think about just because it's just a baby.
Definitely weird.
It is. So this treatment would continue for children of nobility as well. They were regularly reminded that even if they were to be able to be successful in life, it would only lead them to more sadness.
Which makes you wonder why.
I don't know. So they apparently did not believe in happiness.
Were just okay with this?
I guess. So apparently they did not believe in any happiness.
Their religion, but
yeah,
still,
they thought it made them tougher too, because they pretty much knew that life is pain, life is affliction, life is suffering.
To an extent, I guess it's
true, but there is happiness too. It's not all bad.
I mean, for those people, it may have been.
It could have been. I don't know. So another interesting thing they did was stretching children so they would grow.
I've heard about this.
Because, of course, I don't know how you ever grew, because I don't remember ever stretching you. But apparently...
I stretched a lot.
Anyway, so this is actually kind of funny when you think about it. So parents would regularly hold these ceremonies called the stretching of people for them to grow. And during this ceremony, they would take their baby, like this little baby, and they would hold it by the neck and just let the body kind of just hang. Thinking kind of like gravity would kind of stretch them. But they would also, just to make sure, they'd pull on every part of the baby's body, like the arms, the legs, the nose, the ears, everything, make sure everything grew evenly. So you can imagine this child, so they're pulling your leg. Now, I don't know how hard they pulled them either.
I imagine not hard.
But let's hope not, because good grief. And there were also rules that had to be followed to ensure that a child was not short, because apparently this was something you did not want, was a short kid.
I would have been screwed.
I don't know how short was short for them now. You could have been like a dwarf, what they might have considered. I don't know. So, for example, if there was an earthquake, parents had to grab their kids by their neck and hold them. And at mealtime, younger brothers had to let their older brothers drink first. And if any of these rules weren't followed, they believed the gods would curse your children to a lifetime of being short.
Well,
Which, I mean, of course. I mean, that.
Why didn't you ever do any of this?
I
for
know.
me?
I should have done it. Maybe he would have been taller. I don't know. But anyway.
I mean, I don't think I'm really short.
You're not
but that's not the point.
You're not short by any stretch. No. But anyway, you get what I'm saying. It's kind of silly when you think about it that they were that hell-bent on their kids, not being short, which kind of makes me think that maybe it was dwarfism or something.
Right.
It sometimes might have happened because, it probably did occasionally.
Oh, yeah.
And that might have been what they thought.
Also, wasn't there a whole thing where humans during that era were just shorter in general?
Well, they were. I mean, yeah.
So
they were supposed to be shorter back then. So now let's talk about some of the punishment for children. So, as we said earlier, Aztec children were expected to get up early, do what they were told, never dawdle. I mean, they were expected to toe the line. So if their parents told them to do something, they better do it. They better not dawdle. They better not do, nothing. So if the child misbehaved, the parents would take a spine from a cactus and they would stab them with it.
Well, all right.
And usually, if it was a small offense, they would only get a light prick in their wrist. Now, they wouldn't do this until they were around 10 years old. So, I mean, before then, I guess they had it a little easier.
I mean, depending on how deep they pricked, I don't imagine that would be really all that terrible. It wouldn't
really be that bad. I mean, unless they stabbed it in pretty deep. But if it was considered to be a serious offense, the children were stripped, had their arms and wrists bound, and then they were covered in cactus spines.
There it is. There's the cruelty.
Yeah. Now, this one is even worse. Now, after a child reached the age of 11, the punishments would become more severe because they thought they were older, more responsible, whatever. So at that age, a father would hold a child over burning chili peppers that were placed in a fireplace, and they were forced to inhale that acrid smoke. Now, you can imagine burning chili peppers. Yes. Now, this was a brutal practice, and it could result in the child's death if they were held over the smoke too long, as you can imagine. So you can imagine breathing in that smoke. It would be burning your lungs, your nose, everything, because it would have that capsaicin in it as well. Ugh. I mean, it's not comical, but Jesus, who thought that up, right? I mean, come on.
Again, at the expense of this sounding awful, because I know it does, what's comical is the fact that this type of brutality was common among this culture.
Oh, yeah.
This was done as if it was nothing. It was just very common practice.
Right.
About as common as grounding or whipping your child.
Right. Oh, yeah. So then there was poor children, which basically, the ones that weren't more noble in society. So as we mentioned, when children reached a certain age, they were sent to school. That was mainly the boys, of course. However, poor children were also made to learn a trade, and they were also tested in the art of war, so to speak. So these teachers would watch the children, see if they thought they were strong enough to be a soldier. So their strength was tested by sending them into the forest to gather firewood. So every day they'd go out, and each day they'd be made to carry one more log than they did the previous day before. And they would do this every day until they added so much weight that the boy would just collapse. So if the boy was only able to go out just a couple of days, in other words, tote 2 or 3 logs before collapsing, then they would usually only end up being a peasant. They would not ever be anything in society. They were not considered tough enough to be anything. But if a boy could carry more than his own weight, Jesus.
That's impressive.
This would make the teachers take notice.
I mean, that's fair.
I say so. This boy was seen as a future warrior, and from then on, he would be sent to the battlefields to carry weapons instead of carrying the wood anymore. So,
okay.
I mean, that sounds, I don't know how, I'm not sure exactly now. They were supposed to have been around 13 or 14-ish when they were sent to this school. So, I mean, that would be around 100 to 150 pounds, depending on the size of the boy, I guess, you would think. So, that's a lot of weight for a young boy to be toting.
It is.
And more than his weight. So then we have the Kalmakok, and noble children and sometimes a few poor children that were nominated by priests were sent here, which was a school that was run by the Aztec head priest. And while the children were trained, they were trained by these novice priests. They were being prepared to become the most important men in the empire, which was the priests that performed the sacrifices. So the children were expected to learn sacrifice and self-denial. And they were made to rise before dawn and sweep the temple. And once all the work was done, they were made to fast, which basically they didn't feed them. Mm-hmm. And they were taught to be fond of empty stomachs and were starved at every opportunity. Now, these were noble children, and you got to think about that.
Which, again, it's weird.
It is.
Thinking that these are nobles.
Yeah. These are the ones that have money and stuff. And
that have status.
Right. But they would be really important once they become these priests. So this little sacrifice they're making now.
It's the reason this is so weird is because our modern depictions, what we see as nobles, are just
they're usually
spoiled and all
right,
that.
Exactly. They don't have to do anything. I mean, like whipping boys, for instance, was a thing where the prince wouldn't get a spanking. They'd get his other kid and spank him in the place. And that was supposed to punish him. Oh, well, yeah, I'll do better. Whatever.
Which is complete bull
for
of course. Obvious reasons.
Well, duh. But still. They were also made to paint their bodies black and made to wear almost no clothes because they thought that make them more repentant if they were always kept like freezing cold and made them sacrifice. So Spanish missionaries called the Camalcap a house of weeping, tears, and sorrows. And the Aztecs actually went along with this assessment. Parents would tell their children before they left to go there to forget what it was like to live in the comfort and love of home. It is ended, they would tell them. Thou goest knowing it. So, I mean, I guess in some ways, you can look at this. They were honest.
I was about to say, at least they're being honest about it.
They were honest about it. Now, it's not funny, but Jesus. Could you imagine I couldn't imagine sending you off saying that. Just get ready, Frankie. Just, you're out of here. No more comfort of home. You go knowing it. That's brutal to think of a parent saying that to their child, but, oh well. So another thing that happened was boys were publicly shamed. So in Aztec society, a boy could not become what was considered a man unless he was able to capture at least one enemy in battle. So until that time, he was considered a disgraceful little boy.
I was going to say it makes sense up until that point.
Right. And they made sure that everybody was well aware of this. And what they would do is the parents, when a boy reached the age of 10 years old, they would shave all of his hair from his head except for one little tuft. They'd leave this one little tuft of hair. And he was forbidden to cut it or do anything to it until the day that he was actually able to capture an enemy in battle and return the captive to the empire. The growing tuft of hair was seen as a source of shame. Because it meant, the longer it got, the longer you went without capturing it.
Which
you're 10 years old, so what do you do? So, as we said earlier, the boys that, proved themselves to be strong by carrying the wood, they would carry the weapons on the battlefield. Now, what would happen though is these boys, in other words, to get away from this shame, so to speak, many of them would rush into the heat of battle to basically try to capture someone or do something. And they had no training. They were like 10, young kids. And of course, as you can imagine, many of them didn't survive. But if they did, they were considered heroes. So they got that going for them.
At least there's that.
Right. Another thing that they would do is like if the girls would taunt the boys and say stuff like their hair stunk or are you just a woman like me and things like that, which was a big taboo. No. Men did not want to be seen as feminine in any way in those days. That was like something that was like considered no, you did not do it. But my God, can you imagine even living in some of these days and some of this stuff? Like we talked about the Spartans and stuff, which is another one that I want to cover sometime, talking about how they train their kids and stuff. But good grief.
So you go from that type of civilization, the sheer brutality, but the strength that brutality created.
Right.
To nowadays, like here in America, for example, people like me who grew up in relative luxury compared to especially back then.
Oh, yeah.
You dump, again, people like me, my generation, probably specifically, into a survival thing where we have to, like, if we're stranded out in the wilderness, we would not survive.
No, a lot wouldn't because they wouldn't have any survival skills. It wouldn't be
like,
something.
I know stuff, how to survive, but I don't have the knowledge, the experience
Right.
of doing that stuff.
Right. Of course, back then it was a necessity. I mean, you had no choice. You had to do some of these things.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was a very brutal life. I mean, it was not a fun time to be alive. I mean, you can imagine. I mean, there was like no doctors. You got sick. I mean, people were probably living to be maybe 30 if they were lucky. I mean,
If you're lucky.
And yeah, I mean, plus animals, because I mean, they're living out in the
Yeah.
jungle with these jaguars and now God knows what else running around free and rampant. And all they got is their little clubs, which, yeah, they might could take on a horse, but, you know, still, come on.
These weapons being as big and, as I pointed out earlier, as heavy as they are,
Mhm.
you would have to be very strong and very skilled to use
Oh,
it
yeah.
effectively in the middle of combat,
Right.
especially against an animal,
Exactly.
against like a jaguar.
Oh, yeah, because they did very fast. It's very freaky to think about. I would not have envied that time of living at all. And I definitely would not have wanted to live during the Aztec Empire because, good grief.
God, no.
I mean,
Your life would basically almost guaranteed end with a sacrifice.
yes. I mean, I guess they probably didn't have a lot of people dying from old age going to that one having to do those sacrifices because how many of them actually probably made it to old age? And what was old age, right? I mean,
Yeah, really though.
But anyway, we hope you enjoyed learning some more about the Aztec Empire because I certainly did. It's got some very, very interesting things to learn about. Join us on our next episode. Haven't decided yet quite what we're going to talk about, but we'll definitely let you know shortly. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe, and don't forget to stay disturbed.